Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us once again for another very interesting episode on Journeys of Challenge. This is a forum where we identify areas of challenges in life and learn the great opportunities that lie, excuse me, lie within them. And tonight we're a very special guest. Very fortunate to have Rabbi Jay Lyons from the downstate. Here we're in Jacksonville, North Florida, from South Florida. Rabbi Jay Lyons is involved in the Chevra Kadisha, a great educator, and for the Chevra Kadisha over there, a great resource that I personally, our community leans on for many areas of guidance, and a great expert in end of life issues and all that area. So I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming on, Rabbi Lyons.
Okay, thank you for having me. Nice to be here. Thank you for your warm words. I see you're wearing a sweater. That's a little bit of an indication between South Florida and North Florida, but glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting state, Florida. You know, they say the more south you go in Florida, the more north you feel. And as
Right.
you're driving down the 95, once you get to Boca, you feel like you're in New York already.
Right. Right. We say it the other way. We say that the further north you get, the further north you travel, the deeper south you get.
Yeah, exactly. All depends from the vantage point. But the truth of the matter is, I don't know if I need a sweater now, but I woke up, it was chilly. We put the sweater on. History, as the Talmud says. But in any event, I want to kind of jump right in to the topic of living wills and the importance of having a living will. So I just want to ask you just a general question. What is a living will?
Okay, excellent question. So, a living will, there are certain distinctions between certain terms you might hear, advanced medical directives or a living will. There are certain legal differences, but for our purposes tonight, they're going to be all the same. Basically, it goes like this. Fundamentally, from American law, there's something called patient autonomy. And what patient autonomy means is the patient is the master of their destiny, if you will. That sounds a little bit outside of God, but we don't mean it that way. But very simply, what we mean is if your doctor is going to give you two options of a course of action and say, well, there's A and there's B, and here are the advantages and the disadvantages, even if your doctor would indicate that your doctor feels that A is a better choice, but for whatever reason you want to go with B, that is your choice. Right? You as a patient can, with some limitation, right? But you as the patient can decide that you want this treatment or you do not want this treatment. You can deny, oppose this treatment or this procedure or whatever it might be. The question becomes, what happens if the patient is incapable of speaking? That is the question. Now, why would the patient be incapable of speaking? Well, one thing might be that they might be towards the end of their life, a very ill person and terminally ill. The other is that they might be a 19-year-old kid who unfortunately was in a car accident and is brought to the hospital unconscious. It could be a 23-year-old woman in labor that they need to go to a general anesthesia. And now you have very big halachic questions about potentially, a hysterectomy or who knows what. All types of different situations where the patient is just simply incapable of speaking. So now who is the arbiter of what's right for the patient? Who is in the patient's place? Is it the doctor? Is it the next of kin? Is it unclear? So the idea of a living will is that the patient is making a surrogate. Surrogate is the Florida statute's language. Some states use agent or proxy. All these words are synonyms for each other, but we'll use surrogate because we're here in Florida. So you're making a surrogate. So that surrogate is somebody who is standing in your place, and they are empowered by the patient, and they are saying, I am speaking for the patient. Now, the reason why that is a better way of doing things than a classic living will, you could go online, you can Google Living Will Florida, and you can get a whole page, and it can say, if this, then that, if that, then this. The problem with all those checkbox things is that that you could, it presumes that you're able to foresee everything. You can figure out every single possible scenario, and then you can check the boxes, and then there's your advice to the doctor. But of course, we know that's not the case. So what's better about having a proxy, or having a surrogate, is that the surrogate is somebody who you choose. So this is somebody who loves you. This is somebody who understands you. This is somebody of your choosing, that you choose. This is the person. And think about who that person would be as we're talking. If there was one person in the world, you can have an alternate surrogate also. But if there's one person in the world who you would want to be speaking to the doctor, literally life and death, and they have their hands on the steering wheel for your medical decisions, who would that person be? So a lot of people could answer that question. A lot of people could answer that question very quickly. But the point is that person is in charge. They're making decisions. But what they're also doing is that they're having a conversation. They're working with your doctor. They're collaborating between the doctor and the rabbi and what they know you want, right? So that is so much better than checking boxes. There's a lawyer friend of mine down here who jokes around that a person can put that if I have an incurable illness, I don't want any heroic efforts. He's right. So if I have diabetes and I'm choking on a hot dog, that means I don't want the Heimlich maneuver, which of course is not the case, right? But you could read it that way because all the person did was check a bunch of boxes, right? So the idea is that you don't want to be on one of these checkbox living wills. What you want is the standard halachic living will, also called advanced medical directives, where you are empowering somebody to speak on your behalf.
Got it. So basically, if I understood correctly, the idea is that to appoint a surrogate or a proxy, that this surrogate or proxy is very familiar with your wishes, and obviously every circumstances can't be foreseen, but has a general understanding of what you would want, so they can make decisions on your behalf. I guess my follow-up question is there any value in filling out the form that you check boxes, or is it just to have?
Okay, so you might be asking me a legal question, and I'm not going to give legal advice, but I guess I think what I would say is that there are a lot of advantages to the Agudas Yisrael and the RCA in tandem with each other. There's a few different iterations that both organizations had of this process, and they both it's a great example of I guess what you call kina sofrim tarba chachma, that basically each one was trying to come up with a perfect document, and they kind of built off of the other. So what you have right now, the Florida version, literally the difference between the Agudas Yisrael version and the RCA version is that the RCA version uses the generic language agent, and the Aguda uses the statutory language surrogate. And there's one other minor thing about the RCA that I actually like better, as far as it specifically directs the doctors to speak with the rabbi, which is implied in the Aguda one, but it's more black and white in the RCA. But anyway, they're basically the same thing. It's a 3-page document. It's not hard to get through, and you can actually go to nasc.org, which is our website, and you can find I think it's actually me doing it, but it's a little walkthrough 15-minute thing how to go through the document. There are a lot of advantages to the halachic living will also, which is a regular living will. The healthcare surrogate, their authority ends with the death of the patient. There's simply no such thing as healthcare on a deceased patient, right? So what the halachic living will does is that it says, well, okay, but I still want this person to be making decisions even after I pass away. So they get to decide about the how my body is dealt with. And it also makes it clear that you oppose autopsy, you oppose cremation, you want your body to be buried expeditiously. There are certain default things like that. There's another thing also, which is that there are certain the criteria by which death is determined. Okay, is a very big thing in our day, because depending on what state you're in and where you are, that definition of death may be very, very different from the halachic definition of death. So the idea is that what the patients are saying is, I'm in the driver's seat for that also. I'm telling you what the definition of death is. And not only that, but there are certain procedures to ascertain, the heartbeat or whatnot, where the procedure itself we would oppose from a halachic point of view, because the procedure itself is too dangerous. And the idea is that the halachic living will gives the surrogate the opportunity to talk with the rabbi and with the doctor and everybody together, right? And it gives them, it gives the rabbi the. It doesn't empower the rabbi to be the surrogate, because the rabbi is not the surrogate, but basically tells everybody, I want you to listen to this rabbi. Names the rabbi by name, right? So somebody, just take a theoretical situation, right? Somebody at Eitz Chaim. So let's say the gentleman makes his wife his surrogate, which a lot of times makes the most sense, right? And he makes his daughter the alternate surrogate, and he names Rabbi Fish as the rabbi, right? And God forbid this guy is in whatever situation he's in. So now what you're dealing with is that now you have his doctor, Rabbi Fish, his wife, are all making a decision together, and it's really what everybody wants, because you want the people who love you and care about you to be able to communicate openly and to make decisions according to your wishes, according to halacha, right? So it's really it creates, I'm not going to say it's the perfect situation, because of course the underlying problem is that the patient can't talk. So obviously this is a bad situation to be in, but considering you have that medical reality, this is the best scenario surrounding that.
Got it. So let's thank you for your insights there, Rabbi Lyons. Let's dive in a little bit to the issue of medical intervention, end of life issues. So I think it's well known that Halachic law reflects the values of Judaism, the values of the Torah, of putting a premium on v'chai behem, to preserve life, and we put a premium on caring, even for the ill, even with medical treatment, even end of life situations. Can you give us a little bit of an insight in terms of, what are there any exceptions towards when somebody can say, okay, we're not going to treat the patient anymore, the doctors say it's terminal, it's not going to help, or is it, without getting too specifics, if you can just give us a broad perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the broad perspective is going to be that number one is, sometimes people hear that and they're a little bit afraid to sign the halachic living will, because well, if I'm really in pain and it's really futile and whatnot, then I'm afraid you're gonna. So the answer to your question, Rabbi Fish, is yes. There are exceptions. There's all types of different scenarios, which is again why this is so important, because it's not as simple as DNR, and that's it. There are situations where the patient, or if the patient can't, then the surrogate will be instructed by the rabbi to sign the DNR. A lot of that is what I would call futile, meaning to say that not just terminal, because people can live a long life with something terminal, relatively, right? So you don't want to just give up because somebody's terminal, but there certainly is a point where you have a lot of organ failure and it would really be futile, or there's a risk, even in depending on what the potential medical intervention might be, that medical intervention itself may be too risky, that we would say, look, you have to just do nothing, right? Or at least not do that, and keep the patient alive. Well, one thing which is almost always true is that food and nutrition and hydration, the way we would say it, nutrition and hydration is different than medical intervention. And even if the nutrition and hydration is coming in the form of a feeding tube and an IV, but that's almost never is that withheld. That's the basic needs of the person. That's even more basic than rapé, right? That we heal the patient. This is not healing. This is food. So that is one thing. But yes, there definitely are. And again, this is the advantage of the halachic living will, because what it does is that it says, yeah, there are exceptions. This is complicated. There are complicated situations. So, you need to have somebody who really is empowered to make that decision, that they can say, we're going to do this procedure, or they can say, we're not going to do this procedure, but they need to be able, their authority needs to be able to stand more than just a next of kin, their loved one, or whatever. That doesn't necessarily give you the right to tell the doctors what to do when they might think that there's a different course of action, and based on whatever it is that they're coming from. And so therefore so again, the answer to your question is yes. And but what I would basically say, just a couple of major points in it, are the stopping medical intervention is really more like when it's futile, doing nothing. Futile is really the best word to use. Or when there is a risk involved, where the risk itself is not worth it. And nutrition and hydration are different. But definitely what's important to remember is that life, as you said, Rabbi Fish, at the beginning of the question, right, that there's a premium on life, and we don't judge a person's life. We don't judge if one person is greater than the other, or even the person themselves. We're not here to judge the value of that person's life. What we are here to do is we are here to have awe of the gift of life. And so the fact of the matter is that even if this person is probably going to die in an hour, but that hour of life is something that we can't possibly put a value to. It is infinitely valuable, even if that life is a life of being in a bed, with tubes and stuff. But life is infinitely valuable, and really that's a lesson for all of us, because if you think about it, if that's true, then for sure, right, the life that we have, where we are, Baruch Hashem, healthy and vibrant and able to do all types of mitzvos and chesed and learn Torah and inspire other people and be inspired ourselves, then we can really live a life trying to take advantage of all of those moments.
Got it. Thank you. So just to recap, food and nutrition is something that should not be withheld. Obviously, it's not even medicine; it's food and nutrition. You mentioned that if it's can be futile, the intervention, or the risks are greater than than the actual procedure, that would also be a factor. Let me talk about another not uncommon case, and that is a patient is having respiratory issues and can no longer breathe on his own, and the doctors say he needs to be on a ventilator in order for him to continue living, and the family's very unsure if that's the right thing. They just think maybe we should just let him go in peace, as they'll say. If you can just give us some guidance, general guidance, without answering the specific question for every person, just general guidance on that.
Okay, so the answer is I'm not sure if I can. It's one of these. It's going to depend on the other factors. It's going to depend on what else is going on. Again, the default is going to be that, what do you mean? This is a medical treatment that could save his life. So let's try to do that. Now, again, if that's happening, but then there's also a whole host of other problems going on around it. So then that might change things. But the default is going to be that the default action is always going to be to try to preserve life. But again, it's complicated. So it's going to depend on the factors. So the answer to your question, Rabbi Fish, is that no, I can't. No, I can't give general guidelines on that. It's too specific based on the case.
Understood. So there's obviously a myriad of factors,
right?
And I guess it's important to stress that everybody should be in contact with their, get guidance from the rabbinic, the posek, rabbinic authority, and because there's a whole host of factors that go into that. I just wanted to pivot to another area, also related to end of life, and that is the issue of organ donations. So, in society, Western society, is considered a very altruistic thing to pledge to be an organ donor. It sounds, like a wonderful thing. You can cause someone else to live through your passing on your organs. If you're not going to be, if you're in an end-of-life situation. We also do know that, again, I'm not talking about organ donation from one living person to another, like a donation of a kidney. That's a whole separate topic. But we even have when you go, I don't know if it's your driver's license or other documents, they ask you to check a box. Please indicate here if you want to be an organ donor. We also know that there are some halachic issues that preclude someone from becoming an organ donor. So I guess if you can elaborate what those halachic issues are that preclude someone from being an organ donor, and also under what circumstances, generally speaking, would any organ donations be appropriate?
Okay, excellent. So the situation of the live kidney donor is actually not a separate topic, and I'll explain why. Basically, what you have is that you have the donor and you have the recipient. So if you're talking about a surgery, which is a transfer, which is not going to kill the donor and is going to save the life of the recipient, so then we would support that, right? So that's your kidney donation, and that's why you have different organizations that have all types of databases and all that, and that's pretty much has I'm going to say universal support. But what if you had a situation where the procedure is likely or even guaranteed to kill the donor, but you're going to save the recipient? So then we would say, no, you can't do that. You can't decide. Who are you to decide that this person can't live and this person should? They say, well, this person's going to die in a minute or two anyway. So what's their life? Okay, fine. But the bottom line is that if we are going to kill them by taking this organ, so then we can't, then we can't do that, even though they're likely to die, any minute now. And that is an issue that is behind a lot of the halachic issues of organ donation, which is the definition of death. And this is also why the recommendation is definitely do not check the box on the driver's license as being an organ donor, because then you're donating organs according to the rules of the state of Florida, which might be very outside of halacha. Now, there are other issues also with it, but just to stay on the topic here, the issue is that what is the halachic definition of death? Now, that in and of itself is an issue in the Orthodox world, and depending on who you ask. But the idea would be that the state of Florida may define death very differently, or whatever state you're in. You have to remember that you don't necessarily choose where you die, right? So a person could be traveling in the middle of nowhere, and they have that box checked, right? So then that is what it is. So the question number one is, what is the definition of death? In other words, when we're talking about donating organs, are we talking about someone that halacha would view as being alive, who is now having their heart removed from them, or whatever organ we're talking about, and that is going to kill them, right? And there definitely are situations like that. The next issue would be, so that's one issue, right? If the donor is going to die, but the recipient is going to live, we would say no. Okay. There's another situation where the donor is not going to die, but it's very little benefit to the recipient, and or at least it's not life and death.
Well, what would be an example of that?
Okay, so an example of that would be where you're not really donating your organ. You have a dead patient, right? So they're not going to die because they're already dead, but they're not really helping anybody either. Meaning, they're donating it to science. Now, sometimes that sounds very romantic, and sometimes you have somebody who died of a very strange illness where there is a lot of benefit in being able to examine that body. That's a whole different issue in halacha. But a lot of times when you're talking about donating to science, which is what we're talking about with the driver's license, sometimes that science is that your body gets donated to the funeral director in college, and they get to practice embalming you, right? So that is not really very noble, and that's something that we would definitely discourage and protest against. But that is a form of science, right? Or maybe your body is going to be used by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, where the truth of the matter is that they do a better job with those plastic dummies that used to be on the Don't Drink and Drive commercials, if you grew up in the 80s. Right, so like it's not as romantic as it sounds. A more controversial issue would be when you're talking about there are certain parts of the eye that can be harvested from a deceased patient and could restore the vision of another person. Very complicated how that works, whether or not you should participate in that. So the answer to all of this is, the underlying answer to all of this is, the third category, of course, is that it's not going to kill the patient. Oh, no, sorry, that was the first. Okay, so the underlying answer to all of this is that the way that it is stated in the halachic living will is that I oppose organ donation unless I've indicated otherwise in a separate document. And the idea behind that is like this, that whatever halachic organ donation we're talking about is going to be a managed process. It's going to still involve that healthcare surrogate. It's going to involve the rabbi. It's going to be a question that needs to be answered, right? It's going to be based on who's the recipient, who do you have, right? You have somebody, right? So it's like, even if it would be an organ that you're willing to donate, but the likelihood that it's going to get to the recipient who is, on the other side of the country in time, that in and of itself might be like, listen, this is futile. There's a million people who died, today in between here and there. Like, why are we doing this, right? So there could be any number of scenarios like that. So the idea is that it's a very managed process. And also the other thing with it is that it keeps the halachic living will very simple, meaning it's not going through all the different scenarios and step by step and whatnot with the organ donation. So just to keep it clean, the way that, and this is really and some of the rabbis who are behind this are the biggest advocates for organ donation, and they like the language. The language is that I oppose organ donation unless I've indicated otherwise in a separate instrument. And that's how it is in the halachic living will. That's how it is in the emes card. We'll talk about the emes card in a minute. And that's really the best way to do it. So again, you don't want to check the box on your driver's license. You do want to talk to your rabbi about what is and isn't appropriate from the point of view of organ donation. And again, a lot of it is, the biggest question is going to be the definition of death. And there are a lot of what we know of in the realm of organ donation cannot be harvested from a lot of life-saving organs that we're talking about cannot be harvested from a dead patient.
Got it. So obviously, just to recap, the default would be not to endorse any blanket allowance for organ donation, because you don't know where your body part can end up, organ can end up. It can just end up being, like you say, some project from bombing. And those that are inclined to consider organ donation should consult with their rabbinic figure, rabbinic authority. And also, you mentioned a situation, again, we don't want to give psak halacha from this forum, because there's so many variables. But just generally speaking, if it's not going to hasten or cause death to the donor and it would enhance the recipient, for example, you mentioned the eye of the donor being harvested and the recipient. And that would cause, the recipient to have, I guess, restored vision or something like that. That would be something that would be along the lines of something that might be permitted.
It's a discussion, because you also have to remember that we're only 2% of the population. So, do we need to be the ones carrying the water on this, carrying the burden on this one? But yes, that would be more in the realm. I mean, another example is that, a doctor friend told me that you can harvest one of the organs that they can successfully harvest from a dead patient, meaning dead according to everybody, right? No question about it, dead, is skin. So you have a person who is definitely dead and they're in, room 1A, and then you have somebody who's getting rolled into the emergency room with third-degree burns on a lot of their body. That's another scenario where, again, I'm not saying that is the case, right? But that's another scenario where what you have is that you have a life-saving potential, right? And you're not going to kill the patient. So all of these are, the whole thing really does need to be a conversation between the individual and their rabbi.
Got it. I just wanted to, I don't want to drill down too deep, but you just said something which I guess philosophically may be, I guess it's something to explore. The fact that we are 2% of the population. And I don't want to, drill too deep into that comment, but I just know we're pre-recording the session. So I have a feeling that many of our listeners may want to understand and appreciate your comment. Do you mean to say that there's no, that there shouldn't be an undue burden on the 2%, or like, can you just give us more context into that?
I guess what I mean is that when you're talking about a scenario like I described with you have two patients in the same hospital and there's a real transfer like that, or there's a match a different way. So then, like, okay, like now we need to talk, right? If you're talking about a general thing where you're talking about the eye donation, where they have eye banks for these things, right? So how many people in the city, in the country, in the world, whatever, right, are in need of this, and how many people can potentially do it, and like why do we need to be the ones to necessarily any individual Jewish person that like this is a compromise. Why do we need to be the ones to do this if we have a belief to not desecrate the body, and 98% of the population doesn't share that belief? So then like maybe there's a different way that we can give, right? But why do we need to be the ones who give in this way? If you're talking about right, if you're talking about a live patient and you're talking about a kidney donation and they're a perfect match, right, or bone marrow or something like that, so then it's like, yeah, I mean, of course you have a real responsibility now, because how few people, very few people who could be in this place, right? But like that's not this. This is that there are any number of people who potentially could be a donor to this situation. So why is this something that we need to feel a responsibility to compromise our beliefs on?
Okay, understood. Thank you for the clarification. If you can just give us, we're winding down to the end of our broadcast. If you can just give us, share some general information on where to get resources or get more education on this on the web or some other sources, our listeners would greatly appreciate that.
Okay, sure. So basically, you can go to nask.org, nask.org, and we do have a whole thing there about the MS card and the advanced medical directives. I'll just tell you real quick. I've used that term MS card. I haven't really explained it, but basically, this is the advanced medical directives, Halachic living will. Like I said, it's just a very simple 3-page document. But the issue is that let's say you would do this, and you'd even give it to your family members and your lawyer and your rabbi and whoever the surrogate is. But the issue is, if first responders come, I mean, how do they know that you did this, right? How do they know that you have this? So, so the answer is that we came up with this MS card, which is sort of the Cliff Notes version. I don't know how focused we are here. Sort of Cliff Notes version of the advanced medical directives. And the idea is, I'll even show you my own driver's license, that it comes in this plastic carrying case. So if you see on my driver's license, it says see advanced medical instructions on the back. And then on the back, you have the MS card, right? So this way they can see it. So it's a very good tool to have. I was at a fundraising event, and I was sitting next to this non-Jewish travel agent who mostly does senior trips, bus tours all over the country, and she took a whole stack of them. And she said, like, this is exactly what they need. I mean, they should have this, that whatever, they're going to end up in a hospital in the middle of Alabama, and how do the doctors know who to contact? So I said, what about the part about listening to the rabbi and all that? She said, okay, listen to the rabbi, fine. But the point is that it's definitely a very, very important tool to have. So all of this is available on nask.org. The other thing that I would say, though, is with this, it is pretty straightforward. If you read the document, it's pretty straightforward. What we find is that we'll have a session like this. People will be educated about it. People will really even buy into it. And the problem is that just because this is one of those things, so people don't like to do it. And it's not that much of a burden to do it, but you do need two witnesses, which is not the biggest deal in the world, but you need two witnesses. So so some people are going to get together and call over two neighbors and they'll all do it together and they'll just witness for each other. And a lot of people just aren't going to do it. So what I would invite you, Rabbi Fish, sorry to put you on the spot here. You did say it's pre-recorded, so you can delete me. What I would invite you to do is that we do have a program that we do with synagogues where basically get everybody together in the social hall. And the truth is we could do a broadcast like this, or, I'm not so far away, but whatever, literally go through step by step. And everybody has one of the documents in front of them, and we just go through. And as we go through, if you're comfortable with this, then you sign it in front of witnesses, and you really feel really good because then you actually get it done. And there have been a number of times that we've done this where people have said to us on the way out, yeah, I meant to do this 5 years ago and I never got around to it. And it's just like one of these sit down and do it kind of things. The form, after you read it, you'll see that it is very straightforward, very easy to understand, and really no surprises. And the biggest question is, who do you want to be your surrogate? Who do you want to be your rabbi? Most people can answer that question. And the truth is that if they can't answer that question, they should definitely be talking to you, Rabbi Fish, for guidance, because there should be somebody in their lives that they can appoint as their surrogate. And if that's a tough decision, then that is the type of thing that that people maybe need to be counseled through. But so maybe the event isn't appropriate for them. But if anything, it's a bigger problem that they really should have somebody like that that's known to the physicians. And then you take this, you give this to your doctor, you give it to your kids, you give it to whoever, your estate, and the rabbi, and you have it on file, and then you go live life, and it's great.
Okay, sounds like a great idea, and I definitely will seriously consider having such a forum to educate our community about that. Okay. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, Rabbi Lyons, for coming on. This has been extremely informative and educational. It's a topic that nobody really, I shouldn't say nobody wants to talk about, but many people are hesitant to talk about. But some things need to be spoken about, and it's important to have these conversations with family members and with your rabbi if you choose, and with yourself. So I find that there's sometimes a gap in knowledge, a gap in information. Sometimes people have perception. So this forum that we had with you tonight, this conversation was extremely valuable in helping close that gap of knowledge and information. So I thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule, and I want to give you a bracha to continue all of your Avodas HaKodesh holy work, and being a great resource not only for the South Florida community, but to Klal Yisrael in general. So Yasher Koach.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the next great adventure that you and I have together, Rabbi Fish.
Okay, look forward. All the best, Rabbi Lyons.
Take care. Thanks.